All right, we are recording. Welcome to the virtual brown bag. And I do see that just seems to be failing on me. Let me start the app again. I've had that happen just an hour ago when I was in another meeting. I think just crashed. I installed a new version that they put out, and that seems to be a little bit bogus. Let's see. All right, back on track. So virtual brown bag, let's go through the intro slides. We always record these meetings. We always encourage people to share. And, if you are sharing anything, just make sure you don't share anything that could cause you trouble or that could cause us to have to edit the video afterwards, which is, it requires time that we don't have. Just a little disclaimer there. What is the virtual brown bag thingy? This is a place where we get together, we share tips and tricks, we share experiences, we share frustrations, difficulties, maybe something we're trying to get done, and we either found a way to do it, or maybe we haven't found a way to do it, or if we did find a way to do it and we're not happy with it, just run it by folks on the call. Maybe somebody else has been through the same problems and, can help you out. The idea is to have not a one-way conversation. As somebody will usually bring up a topic, start talking, and then always feel free to just unmute yourself and contribute to the conversation. We do this every Thursday from 12 to 1 Central Time here on Skype. It's open for everybody, so let your friends and coworkers know about it. We have shared a bunch of stuff over the years. This is just a small list of topics, not all topics that we've discussed, just to give you an idea that, really everything is fair game. Usually we have software developers on the call, so everything tends to be geared towards developers, but some of us also get into like project management roles and, more like Scrum oriented and, you name it. So everything pretty much is fair game here with us. We have a virtualbrownbag.com website where you can find always the link to this meeting, and as well the link for the videos of the previous meetings. So check it out. And all right, without further ado, let's talk stuff. Hey John, how's it going?
Hey, pretty good. Been really busy lately.
Oh yeah, good.
Yeah.
Was it good busy or just bad busy?
Oh no, good busy.
Good busy. Okay. Excellent. Your camera is looking very, very like crisp today. Yeah, yeah. Did you get like some different lights for you?
So actually, I don't have my lights on, which is why you can see the reflection in my glasses.
Gotcha.
But I did kind of rearrange my camera setup and everything. It's a really good camera. Uh,
Okay.
I just have to set it up so that it's actually in focus.
Right,
But
right.
yeah,
Yeah, it's looking pretty good right now. It's definitely different from the other times you joined in. I can actually see on the picture how clear it is.
yeah. So
And are you using OBS for the background, or you just use?
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
it's the OBS camera. So
good.
I have a green screen, and then I just dropped the improving logo graphic behind it.
Right, right. Yeah, I have been using on my other computer. I use OBS. On my Mac, I started using this app that George actually pointed me out to called spelled just like that.
Okay.
It's
Ah,
pretty good.
okay.
It's in beta right now, but I mean, it does the things that OBS does, but it just makes it a little bit easier for you to like, do the moving around stuff like that, or with just a couple of like shortcuts, like to go like this, and sharing different screens in the background without having to go through the trouble of like setting up scenes and transitions. So it's like a light version of OBS, if you
Yeah.
will, you know?
Yeah. So a little while back, I ran across a little app that Scott Hanselman put together that
Oh,
is, it lets you control OBS from PowerPoint.
huh.
So you just put the name of the scene you want in the comments of the slide, and when you switch to the slide, it switches the screen, and you can do all sorts of weird things with that.
Interesting. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
just a little command line utility that uses the socket server and it uses you know Office automation to talk to the socket server that OBS has.
Hmm.
It's a
Interesting.
little command line app.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. There's another my Beyond the Track meeting that I run, which I've been using OBS for that because for the kind of content that I share there, OBS seems to fit better. Now, good to know about that. I'll give that a shot.
I will say that for Halloween, I had last thing around with um, October. If you turn on like I have a green screen settings without having a green screen, and like make your face disappear, so you're like head lower spinning and stuff. So I've been having a blast with that stuff.
Yeah, it works really great. Like if I have the same background and I don't have my green screen, then it looks very choppy, when you're moving around. But having the green screen like I do have right now, at least for me here, it looks pretty good. It doesn't look like as good as it does on when I'm using OBS, or so it seems, but it's pretty decent.
Mhm.
Cool. All right, and what's
Okay, okay guys, I'm going to step away for a sec. My lunch just showed up.
all right, sounds good.
Yeah,
Cool. Yeah, your audio is already breaking up again, man.
it's really bad.
Yeah.
I can't.
So, oh, broke up again.
I can't download update for stuff. I can barely use Slack. It's that bad.
Wow. Yikes. Just see, Jose joined in. What's up, Jose? How's it going, man? Make sure to unmute yourself if you're talking. Maybe he's not hooked up to the audio yet. Um, let's see. What have you guys been up to? I didn't write down anything in specific to go over today. Pull up screen again. Move it over here.
Yeah.
Get out. So I've just started reading this book here by Dino Esposito. What's happening to my screen share?
Hmm.
What?
Just says you're sharing part of the screen.
Huh, that is pretty weird. Let me try the screen share thingy again.
Yeah.
Bizarre. Okay, let's try that. And here. Okay, that's better. Yeah, just started reading this book here by Dino Esposito, because I've been watching his Pluralsight course on the same topic and decided to just pick up a book and essentially trying to get a refresher on some .NET related things, and I like that it seems that on this book he also, even though he's talking .NET, the implementation is based on DDD and CQRS and event sourcing and things like that. So I wanted to get like a refresher on all that and how it pertains to .NET. Given the time that I stayed away from .NET and then came back, there are things that I probably missed here and there. Has anybody read that book yet?
I think so.
Is that a new book?
I don't think it's new, but it's not terribly old either. Good question. Let's check. 2014. Not too bad. Yeah, and I was going through. I wanted to pick up because what I've been doing as far as like book reading, I read a bunch of books at the same time. I just try to make sure that they are not in the same category. So like I read autobiographies, I read books on I don't know leadership, and then I finished reading a book on like technical things. So I decided to okay, I need to pick up something technical, something programming related, and then decided to pick this one up. Uh, Read the ratings look good, the feedback that people posted there. So it's like, I'm gonna just pick that one. Does anybody have any recommendation on what my next technical book should be? It's like, oh, dude, you should read this one.
I still haven't made it writing software. That one.
I have that one on my list as well, and that was almost like I'll wait for George to finish it and give us his report as to how good the book is, and then I'll pick it up because that's a long book, right?
Not that long. I mean, it's maybe like 400 pages.
Okay, all right, not so bad. I for some reason I had this idea that it was a long book. Okay.
Just book, but it isn't super long.
Yeah, 480. That's not too bad. Okay. And you said you were enjoying it, right?
Sort of. I mean,
Sort
there's good stuff in there, but you have to make it through his toe. A lot you
Yeah.
have to push through. But
Yeah.
there's great content sometimes.
Right, right. I have been put off by authors just because like I couldn't get over the tone, their wording, the way that they talk through the book. It's like I can see there's good content, but man, you are such an A, you know?
Okay. And he's terrible at like DDD. He's just talking shit about it and clearly not understanding it.
Oh, bad.
But I mean, like his stuff actually would fit well with DDD. It's actually a higher level up that like
Okay.
fixes. Yeah, I think there's some stuff in his stuff that fixes a couple of issues with DDD. But yeah,
Hmm.
like I
Okay.
think his view of components and focus on change and volatility
Okay.
is a better thing than how DD that is a better way of identifying bounded context in the DDD way. Because the
Uh,
DDD bounded context is like, well, listen word, and if you notice it's in different context, and maybe context, like at best a rule, but there's a much more thing that they're getting at. Have any better techniques? He's got some good ones.
okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's good. I'll definitely look into it because the project I'm currently on, I'm putting a lot of thinking into all of that, like identifying the bounded context and the domain and all that. So I'm like going through some of these books to get like refreshers and, not just think back of, the original Blue Book, Eric Evans' book on DDD. Just trying to get something more like, okay, now years later, where different people from different backgrounds have gone the DDD path, what other lessons have people learned from it? Because I remember even Eric Evans has a video that I have on my to watch list that he put out like maybe 5 or 8 years after the book came out, where he says, well, these are the things that now I think it's like it diverges from what was on the book from his lessons learned. So I'm like, people who have been implementing on a daily basis, they probably have some other experiences that we didn't get to see on the book. So I'm kind of like looking for those, like what are those lessons?
Yeah.
One thing, one technique that I hadn't heard of before until maybe a couple of weeks ago, or maybe 1 or 2 months ago, is event storming. Have you guys looked into it at all? Have you guys been practicing it at all?
Mm-hmm.
So I read somebody's blog post of that, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago. And I don't know that I do it officially, but I do it a lot.
Yeah. How are you doing? Like, would you mind like walking us through, what the process has been for you, John?
So sure, usually what I try to think about is, after I've had some discussions with folks in the business or, whoever, right, is to try to really think through, okay, what happens, right? I mean, it's like, okay, you make a bid on a project, or somebody comes to your website and picks out their blind, or whatever. You just try to really work through what the things that matter that happen, right?
Right.
And then think about, okay, when those things happen, what do I need to know right then, right?
Right.
So I'm really thinking about it in terms of sort of the types or data structures, whatever you want to think about it, for each of the events that happen, in the business process. And I find that's a really good way to drive thinking about what the design of the application and the flow of the UX is going to look like, because you have to support those things. And my experience has been is like, I think I have it down, and then I go back and I talk to the people who are actually involved in doing it, and I discover, oh no, there's more to it, right? I have to, there, it tends to grow when you do that. So, but basically, what I'll do is just say, okay, so here, you know, you're taking an order, right? So what do you get on an order? It's like, oh, it looks like this. And I always, you always ask these questions like, okay, so is that how it is all the time, or are there some exceptions? Oh yeah, well, we have some special customers that we treat differently, and you really have to drill down on those things, because if you don't, people aren't used to thinking about their jobs in quite the way you need them to,
Right.
because you discover that they just sort of like overlook the sort of the non-happy path events sometimes,
Right.
or the other side of it. And I haven't quite figured out how the best way to handle this is. Sometimes you get people who are so focused on the exceptions that they make things way more complicated than they need to be.
Right.
And and that one's just, you just sort of have to. I mean, I guess the only thing I tell people is like, I just try to be careful when things seem super complicated. It's like, can I take like this whole, we've got these 14 separate things over here. Can we model those as one sort of exception, or, to our normal process, not a code exception, but a business process. Um,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I dig it. Yeah, I've been looking into that from an angle that's like story mapping where you really go, okay, what is the business activity? How does it flow through the different segments and the different people or roles associated with that activity, like beginning to end? Like for example, in the taking order example. So maybe the person is taking an order on the phone. So you have the customer, makes a call, the seller picks up the phone, and the seller has his computer in front of him, or maybe he works on the road and the only thing he has is his cell phone. So he's accessing that information through his phone. So getting these constraints, and then person, uh, places the order and then pushes that order through the sales pipeline. Okay, what's the next thing there? Well, maybe it goes to a warehouse. Okay, what do the warehouse people do with that order? Where does it go from there? And then identify all the events that happen there. So not only thinking about the models that we need, but the events, right? What triggers
Right.
what? So
And I find it really useful to help distinguish when do you need to know certain things. So a lot of times I see applications that are built and it's like it has all the stuff that's required. But early in the process, you don't know half of that stuff, right? Yes, by the time you actually going to go bill for that thing, you're going to have to know all these details.
right.
But the people who are in sales, they want to sell things, right? And so they want to get just enough so they can give them a reasonable estimate on the price or, something like that. And so, you know, understanding the order of events gives you sort of a timeline to think about. Um, because trying to force people to, you know, gather information too early leads to all sorts of problems in the application.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It makes me think of like in the pizza delivery industry in Brazil, something that's a long time ago they figured that worked well for them is, I remember back as a kid, calling the pizza place, you would call them and then you would say, okay, this is the order, what I want, and then they would ask your name, your phone number, your, delivery address, all that every time. Eventually, when they could pick up from the phone number that's calling in, they could get all of that information, right? So
Right.
after they've implemented that, the person who picks up the phone on the other end, they already know where that call is coming from. They already know, what was the last order for this person. So it's more like, hey, Claudio, how are you doing? Would you like to repeat your last order? Yes. Okay, thanks. Bye. Boom. Done. Right? Because they have the context, they know the information, they are provided by the system with everything they need to know. They make adjustments as needed and then just push the order through. Bam, next. So I've been thinking about that a lot as well. It's like when I'm working with the business folks, the stakeholders, like, okay, what is the context? What does the user have? And what do they need to make the best decision given that context? Because if
Right.
we have a million, tables and columns and rows and whatever, it's all that for that moment in time, what
Right.
does the user need,
Yeah.
right?
What you have to have right at that moment to do whatever it is your job is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that I think gets interesting when you start doing this is the problem of the human expert. So, depending on how big of an organization you're dealing with, sometimes the person you get to deal with is the person who knows the most about the business, right? And so they don't realize how much more context they have than the new guy, right? So if you're taking orders over the phone, the person with all the experience may just know, oh, you know what? Sally likes this stuff, right? And the new guy doesn't know that kind of stuff. And it's really hard to try to figure out what questions you need to ask when you're talking to an expert about things. Um, so one of the things, if it's a big organization, I always try to find the newbies. Like, sure, I want to talk to the expert on this process, but give me somebody who's relatively new because they have a different perspective on things. And I was at one client once, and this has been a while back, where what we discovered was that we needed to get the person who knew everything. In this case, it was a woman. We just told her, you know, there's a notes field in this application. Can you just write some of that stuff? Like when you take a call from Sally, write what you know about her in there. And that was the most effective thing. There was no code involved, right? I mean, it was already there. They just weren't using it. And it made a huge difference because now all of a sudden, everybody on the team knew that, Sally doesn't like it if you ask about, this stuff, right? Whatever. So
Yeah.
that one's tricky.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, this is good stuff.
One of the things that's interesting to me is what y'all are talking about with the events or anything. It sounds like I use about I think what I'm talking about is the same thing. And I've been focused because I mean there is a way that kind of goes through various things, right? My audio.
George, you're breaking up pretty bad. I'm having a hard time making out the words.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if you're going to be trying to. Okay. Yeah, if you want to like type into the chat and then we can relay the message, that's fine. Just make sure that I have the chat window open here. Okay. All right, I see that George is feverishly typing.
I already typed.
Okay. For me, it shows that you're still typing.
Yeah.
I think we're all facing internet weirdnesses this morning. But yeah, I do. Oh, here we go. Workflows. Workflows. What you're all are talking about is what I talk about when I talk about workflows. Yes. Yeah, definitely. It's identifying the workflow, identifying the events that happen within that workflow, identifying the data that's needed and by whom that data is needed. The more we come to think about those things and bring those up conversations, the more clarity we have. Because I know that a lot of, like, say, product owners, business analysts, they just, add something to a user story that says, oh, I need the developers to add field X to that screen. Oh, I need the developers to add a button that says whatever to that screen. But never really saying why they need that for. What is that extra bit of data that you want to collect there? When is it needed, right? When does it make sense to need it? When you want that button in there, why do you say that that button belongs in that screen as opposed to a more task-oriented screen to get one thing done in that workflow? So asking those questions, because, and I mean, and I've been telling people, we developers have taught, unfortunately, non-technical people to think that way. Oh, it's just another field that we need to add to the screen. It's just another button. It's just another page frame. We taught them to think that way. So now we have to undo that. So anytime, and the example that I always bring up is when somebody says, I need you to add a delete button to that form. I'll come back and say, no, you don't need me to do that, right? That's not what you want. You are not deleting things. You're trying to accomplish some sort of business activity, and I'm pretty sure that delete is not the word that the business uses. right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, delete has always struck me as just the most interesting sort of thing in the world because it doesn't exist outside of computers. I mean, you don't delete anything ever anywhere else. If you think about it, it doesn't
Yep.
exist. So it's like anytime I see the word delete, it's like, okay, we got to talk about this. Tell me what's really going on. It's like, oh, the person moved and that's not their address anymore. It's like, but are you ever going to care about whether or not it used to be their address? Because if you are, then you don't really want to delete anything. You want to make it go away and not show up when you do your search. But you don't really, and it's just like nobody deletes anything in real life ever.
Right.
Like you can throw stuff away, but that's not the same as deleting. It's just not.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember I just brought up here on the screen 10 years ago, I put out this blog post titled, "You Have Been Deleted," right? Because that's the point that I make to people when they say, "Oh, I need a delete button." I said, no. As an employee, has anybody ever walked up to you to say, "You have been deleted"? Like, no, you have been fired, you have been transferred to another branch, you have, but not deleted, right? And I've had this conversation with product owners, with UX designers, where they insist on having a delete button, and I say, that is not what you want. Let's have a conversation about it, because deleting is not what you mean. I know that we developers, we taught you to think that way, so please forgive us. Let's try this again.
Yeah. And in the chat, George brought up the thing about GDPR. And in that case, what you want to do is remove the records, right? And yes, that's deleting to us. But if you think about it, removing a record is much more in line with what you really want to do in those kind of cases. You want to remove the record happening. It happened, right? It's a thing that existed, but for whatever reason, you need to remove your record of that. And
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Get
But deleting really
people.
goes back to the ancient days, when I was a kid. And, we didn't have enough room to do anything. We had to delete things or we'd run out of space.
Yes. Yep.
But that was
Yeah.
a technical limitation.
Yeah. Yep. And I remember, like, even in the my Fox Pro days, when said you went to a record and you said delete record, you were not really deleting it. In the database, it was just flagging that.
Yeah.
If you wanted to really physically remove it, you had to run a patch command, which would purge those record flags for deletion. So yes, have changed. I see George says it's actually a lot more complex than that even, because often you have second and third order effects you need to fuss. So
True.
yeah, but it's even like a think we didn't have computers and we have some like pen and paper or just like something on the paper that got created, and for legal reasons we need to get rid of it. We are not deleting it, we are destroying it. We are there's an actual verb in the language that we use for that, which is not deleting it. That's what I keep bringing people back to is think that you don't have computers. What would you call that? Right? You wrote something on the whiteboard and you need to get rid of it. Do you delete it? Oh no, I erase it. It's like, yes, that's the verb that we use. Right? But yeah, some people might think, oh, those are just technicalities. But I think finding the right words and the right meaning associated with the words, I think it's important to add clarity. And George
Yeah.
says it's all the fault of spreadsheets for being so good.
Yeah.
So we're
That's true.
yeah,
You know, it, I'm going to try not to get too far down this rabbit hole, but it is really irritating to me when people have code that does things like create person, because it's like, no, in your system, you're not creating person. Unless you're a labor delivery room, it is unlikely that what you're doing is creating a person. Like, you're really creating a record of your first interaction with this individual, but you're not creating a person. And it just drives me nuts because people think of it like that. It's like,
Yeah.
um, it, when I worked at Administaff, I was, we had this create employee, and I was like, no, we're not creating employees. That's not what's happening here. Um, and then my oldest son was a summer intern there and said, okay, finally, I can say I created an employee.
Yep.
But I'm the only one here who has. And then somebody said, no, there's all these other people who had their kids work here too. But
Yep. Yep. Yeah. This is I don't remember where, but I have been on an article where the guy says, trying to steer away from the whole CRUD side of things. So whenever we are using words like create, take a step back and think, do we mean create by physically creating a record of that in some database or some sort of storage? Or is it like in the real life, we say, I need to create X, right? What is it that we're trying to model? Let's model it after the real world, not the persistence layer side of things, which is a huge shift. A lot of people have a lot of trouble thinking that way.
yeah, this has been one of the things that I've struggled with people because I don't know that I ever liked the idea of CRUD. For one thing, I'm completely against the U and the D. I don't think you ever update anything, and I don't think you ever delete anything. In my world, what you do is you record things that happen. Like, stuff happens, and if you care about it, you write it down. And you may be recording something that says, I don't care about this customer anymore because, they left or right? But you're not deleting anything.
Right.
And when somebody moves, yeah, you can think about it like you're going to update their database, but what you really want to do is record their new address. Because I guarantee you somebody needs to know that sometime in the past they had a different address. And,
Right.
you know, and to me, I've tried to come up with other acronyms because I really hate CRUD. I, as a mental model, I think it's dangerous to people.
Yeah.
And I think what you need to realize is that the computer is a replacement for the medieval monk. There was always some monk, the people who knew how to write, they were literate, and they would write down the records of everything. And that's all that the computer is doing for you, is writing down what happened.
Yes. Yep. I agree. George says, I think we should be also a bit generous to using these words in RESTful architectures. People constantly get it wrong that this maps to the database, but that wasn't the point of REST. It wasn't about modeling of entities. It was about modeling of workflows as a sequence of stateless operations on resources. Yeah. Yeah. I've been really big into, keeping those things in mind, because like when somebody says, oh, I need to create an order, do you? That means creating something physical to store somewhere, right? But as a real person, do you say, I'm ready to create or order? Probably not. We say, well, I'm ready to take your order.
Right.
I
The
I
order
took your
belongs to the person, not the person on the other end of the phone, generally, not the
exact.
person recording it.
Yep.
Unless you got an e-commerce website, in which case, I'm ready to create my order. That's
Well,
kind of okay. But
wouldn't
most people don't think about it like that.
but even so, wouldn't it be like I'm ready to place my
Right.
order?
That's what people think is that I want to place my order. Because in reality, I knew what I wanted before I got down and sat down at the computer to type it into Amazon's, order form or whatever. Right. It's like, oh, and the other thing is like, I had a good friend who always would tell me, people don't go to Home Depot to buy a drill. They go to Home Depot because they need a hole, and they need lots of holes. And so they go get something to make the hole, right? It's like,
Yeah.
try to remember that the short-term goal may not actually be the real goal, right? It's
Yeah.
like, you know, there's a reason people are there ordering the thing, right? And sometimes it's more of a marketing thing than a computer thing, but it can be really important to remember sometimes. I remember when we were at Blinds, there was all sorts of stuff about like selling blinds that I had no idea. Like, that's really a thing, right? I mean, not just physically, but I mean about the process of selling, how they could like change the color of a button and make more money, and you know, and those things matter. And I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. So just like really trying to get an idea of what is the need that somebody is trying to fulfill.
Yeah.
And it, you know, not everybody who buys that thing is actually filling the same need, you
True.
know. And so it, that doesn't necessarily help you build the app, but sometimes it's actually critical. And so I try to ask those kinds of things. Like, you know, like at my current client, what they do is inspections of pipelines, right? But the
Mhm.
actual need that's being fulfilled is, well, so indirectly it's they want to keep the regulators off their back, so they have to prove that they inspected things. But more than that, they don't want whatever's in that pipeline spilling out everywhere for all sorts of reasons, right? And so it's like you have to think about those kind of things to get your, you know, a grip around why does the business work this way, right?
Yeah.
And that can matter to the way you design your app too.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so you just, I think it's more complicated than most people think.
I agree. And I really like it. It goes back to what's his name, Simon Sinek's. Start with why. Because if
Mhm.
you enter, a store and you say I need a drill, well, you say what you need, not why you need it, right? Going with I need to make a hole. Well, that helps the person actually give you what you really need for that context, for that challenge that you're trying to overcome. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And lots of domains, you know, the salesperson or whatever you want to call the person actually is an expert and can help you not get the wrong thing. Because I
Yeah.
mean, I've done this lots of times. You go in and it's like, I want this thing, and the person's like, well, what are you trying to do? And I'll explain to him, it's like, you know, we have this thing over here. Now, sometimes it's more expensive, sometimes it's less expensive, but if it's actually better filling my needs, I feel like they've done me a good turn, right? I mean, it's just like, and
Yep.
so, you know, apps can help people do that. If, you know, if we really understand that sort of thing.
Yes. I really like that. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. It's like I always tell people, who know about my motorcycle riding experiences. I always say, hey, I know how to ride, but I am not mechanically savvy. So I really don't know the things about the tools and what I should be toying with and whatever. So it has happened to me when I walked into a store and say, oh, I need this tool, right? And I was fortunate enough for the seller actually to tell me, what do you need it for? And then I would explain it, and they would say, oh, that's not at all what you need.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked, because I thought I was sure that that's what I actually needed, and I was so wrong, and I would make a big mess, a fool of myself, because it's like I asked you what I need, what I want, you give what I want, but that's not what I need.
Right.
And with software, we do a lot of that, right? When as a developer, if somebody says, well, I need you to drop this button on this form and do this. Okay, I'll give you what you're telling me that you want. And then later they come back and say, well, yeah, that's not, satisfying the business. Well, why not? Well, eventually it's because I gave you what you wanted, not what you needed.
Yeah.
Because that step to understand why do you need that.
Yeah, and a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's talking about UI elements and things, it's like, I'll need, we'll go back to your example. I need a delete button. Like, but what do they really want that delete button to do? And
Right.
who else in the organization does it affect?
Yep.
And this is one of those times where you have to be really careful with your DDD and your bounded context because there's always those places where they intersect, and you have to be really careful not to step on somebody else's area. It's like, yeah, they said they wanted to delete that, but we can't delete that. We have, a legal requirement, so you make it go away and hide it on their screen, but don't actually delete anything, right? It's like, so
Right.
that gets back to your point. It's like, you really have to know what it is you want from that, right? Uh,
Yeah.
it's, people are not, they don't naturally think the way a software developer thinks about things. And so you really have to pay careful attention to say like, oh yeah, it's always like this. Well, if you're not a software developer and you say it's always like this, you mean it's like that most of the time. But if you're a software developer, you hear always like this, it's like, oh, I have a business rule, I'm going to enforce it. And
Yes.
yeah, that one still burns me occasionally.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. This is good stuff. Yeah, another case I always bring up is years ago, a good friend of mine was working with neurologist, and they approached me because they knew I did software. So they said, "Oh, you do the software thing. So here's a situation. There is this cognitive app in the market that people will run that app. They take the cognitive test, and then that app produces a report. It sends it over to a server. Here's the question: can I get that report somehow and save it in my own database?" Right? That was the ask. I
Yeah,
said, well, potentially, yeah, maybe they have an API that we can tap into, get that result, and put it in a database. Okay, yeah, I could have given them something like that. But is that really what they need? At
yeah.
the end of the day, what they really needed, and let me bring up the what it ended up being. Excellent. Oops. Excellentbrain.com. What they really needed was a solution for sports concussion management, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, boiling it down, so there was, yes, a cognitive test software in the market. What these guys wanted to do was to get that data to establish the baseline for athletes at the beginning of a season. Because should they have a concussion playing some sports, they would take the test again and then compare the results to see, hey, at their baseline, these are or these were their reaction times, their memory skills, and everything like that. After the concussion incident, that's where they got impacted. Their memory is suffering, their reaction times are suffering, and so on. That's what they wanted, and they wanted to originally grab that data so that they could establish their normative database, meaning, well, this kid, 15 years old, a boy, in this part of the country, right, he's never taken a test. We just received his test. So compared to the other kids in the same demographic, is he considered normal, right? Is him within the what's considered normal for that demographic? That's what they wanted to establish, their own normative database, right? But
Right.
this understanding only came after I sat down with them and I've read about concussions, and I understood that at the time, there were no laws about how quickly a kid who got concussed could actually go back to gameplay. There was a lot going on there. So I had to do all this researching, all of this poking. Why? Until I helped them develop the whole solution around concussion management. But Just a long-winded way to explain why it's so important to just not give what people ask you and ask, why do you need that? So that it can give you the best solution for what
Right.
you need.
And it's the more expert somebody is in their field, the harder that is to do because
Yeah.
they're jumping to what, a perceived solution in their head because they know their business or, or neurology or whatever. But, um,
Yeah.
and it can seem a little tedious to pull that back from people and say, look, we need to back up here a little bit,
Right.
and talk about what you're really trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Exactly. See, George says, so you don't post a user necessarily. Maybe you are modeling the invite your friends workflow. You post an invite and there is a next step in that workflow. It might be to put a user, or it might be something more involved where you put an approval, which then changes to another approval or something.
Right. And now you have a state machine that you're thinking about.
Right. And I was doing like a little bit of research on this a couple of weeks ago just to see what people are doing in regards to discerning between post and put and everything. And a lot of people doing CQRS, it's always a post. You're posting this message, and then whether in the end you're going to be creating a brand new resource in the backend or whether you're updating something, it's not up to the verb to decide. As far as the verb, it's like, well, you're just creating an entry for this message. I have received a message saying the user has indicated that they want to do X. So create that in the backend and then have something that's going to process that information and do it all. What do you guys think about that? What are your thoughts about
So
it?
I I have a really strong bias because of the way I see the world. And to
Okay.
me, the world involves sending messages. Like every communication you have with a human being or your system or whatever, to me, it's modeled most effectively by saying, okay, here's some information, right? Uh, and it is important to know the difference between a command and a request, like, hey, do you know who Claudio is? Versus uh, something like, here's my address for Claudio, right? So this is Claudio's email address, right? What happens after that can be all sorts of different things. There may be a process that sends Claudio an email and waits for a response or for him to click on a link or whatever, right? It's like, but that's not my concern at the time I'm doing this.
Right.
So I tend to do everything in terms of just straight up post and get. And it
Yeah.
maps almost perfectly for me to command and query. And,
Yeah.
I've thought about the world that way for so long. Um, I actually have to work hard when I come across a system that's not really like that, which doesn't happen very often because mostly I'm doing business systems and businesses are just that way because that's the way we run businesses generally.
Right.
Like,
Right.
oh yeah, hey, my sales guy says that he's got a new prospect, right? So it's like you could you could model that as a put on a new prospect, but do you really know they're a prospect yet? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So posting the message that says, oh, this account manager has identified a potential prospect, right? That tells you everything you need to know. That you can model that scenario. And it's just easier for me to model things that way. Um,
Yeah. That makes
I mean,
sense.
the only time that I think about puts and deletes is when it's really and truly a document management scenario.
Right.
Where it's like, oh, you know, if you're, I mean, the funny thing is you can't use this in most systems where you would want to, which is like, oh, I'm going to upload the purchase order, right? I want to put a purchase order. Well, in most systems, for various reasons, you end up having to post it because of reasons, right?
Right.
But I mean, to me, that's a now I hardly ever think about using delete because I'm just generally opposed to deleting things.
Right.
I guess I'm a pack rat in that sense about, but I could see that. But in general, I mean, if you're thinking about rest, to me, it's like, hey, here's this message for I'm asking you to do something, or hey, can you tell me, right?
Right.
Like, and I think you can decompose almost every interaction into those things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It does make me think like if we create, task-based UIs, right? So the user declares, okay, this is the task I'm trying to accomplish. So the endpoint that the UI is going to be hitting is going to be either a get or a post, right? You're either retrieving some information to allow the user to make a decision or to perform a task, and then you're recording the user's intention of performing that task. So you're posting that intention.
Right.
And then behind that layer, yeah, we may have microservices that are fully RESTful. And behind that, you're going to decide, oh, yeah, at this point, I know whether I'm putting something, whether I'm posting something, or what's happening there. But that's behind this facade that the user is actually
Right.
interacting with.
Right. And unless there's a good reason, I typically don't put HTTP between my microservices. But again, that's a personal preference sort of thing. Um,
Yeah.
I don't even like to think about it when I do use HTTP.
Yeah, that's
My
good.
favorite little library that I've been using recently is a remoting library that just basically says, hey, here's this thing, this type in your language. It handles converting it to JSON and sending it to the server side and, handing it off. And rehydrating is the exact same thing that you wanted to send. And it's like, to me, that's like nirvana. Like, that's where I want to live. I want to say, hey, here's this thing I created, this shape, and the client and the server know exactly the same thing in terms of what those shapes are. It's like, build the data into the shape, send it over, let me deal with it. I would be perfectly happy not having to know anything about HTTP or anything else.
Yeah.
And I'm always a little amused by people who think, like, yes, I've written systems where I had to know every little detail about HTTP. Um, that's just not, if you're doing that, you're like on the cutting edge of something. The last time I did that, I was trying to write uh, software for an IoT device
And
to interact with a third party website. So yeah, I had to know every single thing about the way HTTP worked and how that service worked and the authenticate, all that stuff because nobody had ever done it before. But most of the stuff I do, it's like, people have done this. I don't have to reinvent this.
exactly.
Hey, listen, I'm gonna have to drop off. It's 1, and I've got some things I got to take care of. But
Yep.
it's actually been a good conversation, and too bad George had some issues there. But
Yeah, I'm sure he is like dying to, just contribute to the conversation here. It sucks. Hopefully, maybe next week it's gonna be back to normal. But yeah, this was a great conversation. Thanks, John, for helping us out with the conversation, and George, posting on the chat. At least we were able to communicate that way. Great stuff. Thanks, guys. Hope to see you
okay,
back.
bye.
Enjoy the afternoon.